Tripod, the official Trinity University Press podcast, invites authors, journalists, community leaders, and other guests to engage in exploratory, informative discussions on the subjects of people, places, and the planet. I'm Lily Brennan, and welcome back to another episode of Tripod, the official podcast of the Trinity University Press. Joining me today is David Lesch, a professor of history at Trinity University, a prolific author and lecturer on the cultural complexities of the Middle East, and conflict resolution specialist for 5 U.S. presidential administrations. Also joining us in the studio is Catherine Nixon Cooke, an elected fellow and medalist in the International Explorers Club, a former journalist, public speaker, and award-winning author of histories and biographies, including her most recent publication, Dodgers to Damascus, which details Lesch's personal journey from baseball to the Middle East. Today, Lesch and Cooke are here to discuss their recent collaboration and how writing and reading the stories of others can better connect us to the people and places in our lives. Welcome, David and Catherine.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise.
Thank you both for being here. And I wanted to kind of start with some introductions to the both of you. I recently graduated Trinity University, but I never actually got to take a class with you. So I don't have any personal introduction to you. And obviously I just met you today, Catherine. But if we want to start with you, David, I know you are a professor at Trinity, but obviously you've had an extensive career. Do you want to just give a brief introduction to yourself?
Sure. And what did you major in at Trinity?
I was a communications major.
And you never took a history course?
I took something adjacent to history.
I won't hold it against you.
Yeah.
But anyway, no worries. So anyway, I believe it or not, this is my 33rd year at Trinity University. I came here in 1992 as a young assistant professor, and now I'm the Ewing Household Distinguished Professor of Middle East History in the History Department. And during that whole time, I've been active as a scholar and have been the author-editor of 18 books and have involved myself, as you said, in conflict resolution and negotiations in the Middle East at some of the highest levels with the U.S. government, involving the U.S. government, the United Nations, a number of governments in Europe, and of course, governments and people in the Middle East. And that's just been an amazing and adventurous ride, which is, I think, one of the reasons Catherine wanted to write about it. If it was boring, it would not make for a good book, perhaps. You know, here I am today, and I'm just honored and privileged that this wonderful author, Catherine Nixon Cooke, chose to write my biography because she's a wonderful, wonderful custodian of my story.
Catherine, I was also going to ask for a brief introduction from you as well. Obviously, you're a prolific writer, not only just of David's story, but many others. Can you give a brief introduction to yourself?
This is my 4th book for Trinity University Press, and I've been writing as a published author for the last decade, 15 years, and a couple of the biographies have been made into podcasts and are optioned for films, which is exciting. And as David said, I was riveted by the story because my very favorite is a biography about a person who's making a real difference in the world. And at the same time, I can take readers to places in this world they've never been. So getting to venture to the Middle East with David was one of the highlights of writing it. And it is adventure-filled, but at the same time, and I know we'll talk about it in the podcast, there's so many other levels and elements to the story that go beyond just an adventure story. So I was thrilled when he asked me to write his biography and really feel honored to have done so.
And I think, one of the things, Catherine, that you wanted to do with this book is not only my story, but contextualize it within the modern history of the Middle East. So one of the great things for the reader who may not be as familiar with Middle East history as I am, or now Catherine is, or some others, is that it provides this history, of many of the wonderful and also tragic and exciting events in the Middle East in the last 50, 60 years. And so you not only learn about me, you learn about the Middle East as well.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of the nitty-gritty of how the two of you met. I guess I wasn't sure if you've been introduced through the press or if you knew each other outside through Trinity.
Well, we actually met. I did not know her prior to meeting her first a few years back because I was interested in her doing another project. That turned out not to work out for a variety of reasons. I think Catherine felt that that just wasn't her thing, this other project. But she also, in meeting with me, and Catherine being Catherine, does her research. And so she researched me, and then we talked a little bit about my life at that thing. And I remember asking her, I said, do you think it's worthy of a biography? And basically she said, these weren't her words, but she said, hell yes. It's very worthy. And so it took off from there. And we were meeting also with Tom Payton, the former head of Trinity University Press. So
I'd love to hear more about the Dodgers to Damascus story. Just a brief, I guess, summary of the book.
Well, before I summarize the book, I would say he had me when he mentioned being poisoned twice and surviving.
Which is how the book opens as well, which I found to be like such an excellent hook.
I used it for my opening chapter, and I thought, I want to write that book. So it's filled with adventure, but as I delved into the story, it's so much deeper than just the life story of a remarkable man, David Lesch. It is that, but it also delves into human nature and what we do when life throws us curveballs, pun intended, since he's a baseball pitcher, and how we reinvent ourselves when needed, and how we find resilience to face problems. So everyone, whether they've ever played baseball, whether they intend to go to the Middle East, will find something in this book, I think, that inspires them and that they can relate to. So I loved the depth of the story. That's what really appealed to me the most.
Yeah, I think in reading the book, I just finished it recently. I completely agree in the sense that there is so many more deeper messages. And specifically, I was reading it knowing you two would be coming to the podcast. And our tagline for Tripod is People, Places, Planet, meaning by bringing people like the two of you together as people to discuss the places they've been, the things they've done. People who listen to this, get a better sense of how to connect to their own place, whether like in time, like our current sort of political climate, or their own place. If you're living in San Antonio, you're going to meet two fantastic people in your area that kind of help make the world a better place by making us more connected in a time when we're very disconnected and polarized, as your book discusses heavily. And I found that really inspirational for the purpose of this podcast. And I think a lot of the questions we'll get into today kind of dive into those more thematic portions. But I am not a big biography reader, and I still found, because of those themes, I really enjoyed it. But who is your ideal audience for the book, and what would you want them to take away?
Well, I think it's a huge audience. And there are several groups that one could talk about. Certainly people interested in just a life story of an interesting person. Those biography readers that we're talking about would be interested. But again, it is bigger than that. And with the Middle East being so much in the news, and I believe that even those of us that are well educated and quite in the know here in the West especially do not know much about the Middle East. I've been gratified by some of the reviews that have come out for the book that have said the good news is you don't have to be a Middle East scholar to learn a lot about the Middle East in this book. And so David and I talked about it, and I really wanted it to be the layman's version to a very good history of what happened long ago, not so long ago, and recently, that has created the very complex region that we see on the news. So I think giving more understanding of that was part of the appeal for me. And then, as I said, all of these wonderful, deeper life lessons that are throughout the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is such a diversity in subject, as you said. I also found myself while reading this thinking, because I recently interviewed Michael Fisher as well on his How Books Can Save Democracy, which I found so many great parallels between your experience and also his messaging and the themes of your book. But talking with the ideal audience, I found myself wondering if more, not teachers, well, I think teachers obviously would love this book, given that you're a Trinity professor, but also other leaders and things like that would so benefit from reading the story. Aside from the ideal audience, what's a takeaway that you hope people would have from this, as either, as a leader reading this, or as somebody interested in the Middle East, or a student?
Keep trying. I think one of the people Catherine, interviewed, Jeff Feltman, who's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, Undersecretary for Political Affairs at the UN, which is second in command at the UN, a former ambassador, he called me indefatigable. I can't be defeated. I keep coming, and you have to have that resiliency that Catherine spoke of earlier. And I think sports, playing all sorts of sports growing up, helped build that, because at the core of sports is failure. And as many people have said, in baseball as a hitter, you only have to be good or get a hit 30% of the time, and you'll be in the Hall of Fame. So you fail 70% of the time. So you have to deal with failure. It's constant in sports. And when you deal with the Middle East and in high-level negotiations, as I have, in war zones and the Syrian civil war and so forth, there's a lot of failure. And there's a lot of failure due to things totally out of your control. So you have to be resilient and you have to persevere. You have to persist through these things and have the bigger goal in mind. Perhaps something will work at some point.
And I would add that another person that I interviewed, wonderful interview, was with William Ury, who wrote the book that all of us read growing up, I think, that Getting to Yes. Many corporations read it, and it's a great book about conflict resolution and saying that how to start, how to listen, and how to get from no to yes. And it's a great formula that David and William have used in the Middle East in their work together. And his newest book, Possible, just echoes what David just said about keep trying and not to necessarily be looking for the success of the future, but what you're doing right this minute that's helping you get there slightly. And building on that, we're also talking about much closer to home than the Middle East. It can be the dinner table where your family is trying to decide where to go on summer vacation, something that, and it's how you talk and find out and listen and hear all sides that are part of that getting to the possible.
Yes, absolutely.
Enjoying the conversation with Catherine Nixon Cooke and David Lesch? Check out his biography, Dodgers to Damascus, David Lesch's Journey from Baseball to the Middle East, now available for purchase on the Trinity University Press website and anywhere you buy books. Use Tripod's discount code, Dodgers20, to save 20% on your purchase of Dodgers to Damascus at tupress.org. I think those are excellent takeaways, and on that note, I know I was reading it trying to generate these questions, being like, what were my takeaways and what questions do I have? And that was definitely one. The mantra, I want to say it's never eliminate yourself, correct? And that's, you just put it to a T of just keep trying, right? And the idea of being a possibilist versus, a pessimist or an optimist, but a possibilist. I loved that concept as well, which is explored in the book to anybody who plans on reading it, as you should. But I wanted to jump in the actual importance of biography and personal narrative and why it's important to write and read those things. So I was going to just return actually to the foreword of the book, which is by Peter C. Goldmark. And he writes that many people feel lost during this fluid period of impetuous polarization. And I was curious what you thought about how people can ground themselves during this time through your story. I think that message of keep going, keep trying is really important, but is there certain strategies that you would give people?
Yeah, in fact, I wrote this essay, which I'm going to submit, it's an op-ed, and it's called Threads. And it's a idea I've been developing. Unfortunately, not before the book was completed, but the essence of it is in the book. And basically, it's from a story. I was up in Fredericksburg one day. My wife was out of town, so I just went up for a couple days just to relax, write a little bit. The night before I started writing this, I had an experience at a bar where there was music. And this guy, he's over there, and we're really starting to talk. In dress, in attitude, style, complete opposites. And I'm sure in terms of politics, complete opposites. And so he asked, hey, can I come on over? And we sat down and we talked about family. We talked about travel because he was in the oil and gas industry. We talked about music and we had a great time and we started a friendship. Yet if we had talked about some other things, maybe that it wouldn't have gone that far. So in my mind, even with your most vehement opponent, there are threads you can find of positivity, of connection that prevent, a negative discourse, that prevent the polemics and the volatility that exists in social media and all across the country. And that's a choice. That's a choice you make. Yes. You don't have to fall into these patterns and conventionalities. That's a choice you can make is, I can focus on these negative threads, or maybe let me find out about some positive threads. Let me find out, where have you been? What's your family doing? How many kids do you have? And you can connect on those levels, and then that really tamps down the volume on some of the disagreements at other levels. So that's something I'm really pushing now, and I think in a different way, and many other different ways, comes out in the book.
That reminds me from speaking with Michael Fisher. I'm going to probably continue to refer to that just because I think your story is a testament to exactly his theory, or not his theory, but the truth of the power of literature and what reading other people's stories can do.
I love the theme of threads, and I'd like to say a little bit about Peter Goldmark, if I may, who wrote our foreword. He's a longtime friend of mine. I've probably known him about 20 years, the former president of the Rockefeller Foundation, then the publisher of the International Herald Tribune, then a very big job at Environmental Defense. And now he's mainly a writer and lives in New York and a dear friend. But if there is ever a person who understands those threads, thinking of all the things he's done and the problems he's tried or been a part of solving worldwide, I was so thrilled when he agreed to read the book and write the foreword. And I thought he captured it perfectly. Yes. So I'm very grateful to Peter.
I think he really contextualized the broader importance of the book, of not just wanting to read somebody's individual story, but pulling out those threads and the importance of them and finding perspective on somebody and those commonalities. When I guess I'm curious what you might say as to why do you think it's harder for people now to pull up to that person in the bar and just talk to them about their family or travel?
Assumptions. They have preconceived notions of what this, I did. I had a preconceived notion of this other person at that bar. And I was like, ooh, he's coming to sit near me. But, and that was, very mind-opening for me. And I should know better. I do this all the time with people that want to kill each other and all that. But so I've fallen into some, as we all have, in some of these conventional thinking. And you have to think outside the box and you have to try a little bit. As I said, it's a choice. And so he's the one that chose and initiated, and I'm glad he did. And so, it's all within us to do this. Don't fall into these traps. Don't fall into these silos and that divide people. I mean, there are lots of ways to connect at different levels that can not eliminate the differences at all, but it can dampen, I think, the heated rhetoric and volatility of the situation.
And I think maybe it's our social media or what we see and hear today on the news, on the radio, something has discouraged the initial grace of saying to someone, hello, how are you? What are your deeper thoughts? And in the past, I think our world was a little bit more attuned to that, more willing to ask those questions and look. And I hope that it will come back. I think we'll see a swing, but there's something in sort of an acceptability of being rude or not looking for that connective thread and just stating one's business and quickly moving on.
Yeah, I mean, on social media, on Facebook, a lot of people block people with whom they disagree. I actually do not. I mean, I keep as friends people whose views are just wildly different from mine, and maybe in some inner recesses of my mind, they're even preposterous. But I want to know what they're thinking. I think it's good to know what they're thinking and understand, and try to understand, empathize, try to put yourself in their roles. Why do they think this way? And so that's the beginning of really conflict resolution and building ties rather than building divides.
And the interviews that David did during the Syrian Revolution, when he was there during the Civil War, he interviewed many people, at least 14, took many more than 14.
About
114
yeah, right.
About that, and collected so many diverse views and understood that to really understand them, you have to really listen.
Right.
Trinity University Press is a mission-driven publisher committed to civic engagement with timely ideas facilitated by the publication of print and digital books, related media, creative and educational programs, and other activities that help us all better understand our place in a crowded world. For more than 50 years, Trinity University Press has published more than 225 titles and organized thousands of events, all focused on broadening our understanding of many impactful subjects, from human relationships with our physical environments to social equity and justice. For more information about Trinity University Press, visit tupress.org. Well, I think certainly from an interview perspective, that pulls in a lot of diverse views, but Catherine, you as a writer, somebody in the position of writing somebody's story, how does that help you engage with other people, new people? And do you think that's passed on to readers as well through reading biographies and fiction and other stories?
I really hope it is. And I guess I would have to ask my readers that to find out. But I hope it is. And you're absolutely right. We could have written this. David is such a fine writer. He could have written this as an autobiography, certainly, and just written a book about himself and all the interesting things he's done. But by doing it as a biography, I was able to interview such an array of people, from diplomats to his former baseball players, to his wife, to his friends, to his childhood chums, and really see all those aspects of David. And I think when one can do that in a biography, I think it's why I love biographies so much, you get a more complete picture. And I do think that someone reading that could go, oh, that was interesting what so-and-so said about David, and realize that it's a bigger picture of everyone, the way you present a character or a personality.
Well, I'm curious now that you're saying that, of what sort of interview tactics do you bring in to get those really heartfelt, empathetic answers out of somebody? I know you both have lots of interview experience.
Well, you know what I didn't say when you were asking about my background, because it was so long ago. In my first incarnation as a pretty young graduate from Stanford, I worked for magazines on the West Coast. And by a fluke, an older editor who was all of 45 or 50 made me the editor-in-chief of a national magazine called Coronet. And all it was interviewing people. And I learned that by showing that compassion that David is talking about, that they longed to tell me things. And it was a gift. And I've always respected that and been careful with information that people share with me. But I do immediately try to immediately establish a great rapport with my interviewee. And as we talk, I think they know I care about my character and that I'm going to be respectful. And I can say, having finished the book, it's one of the great gifts of writing it. I now have all these people that I've met via Zoom and in person that have added to my life in a big way.
Do you feel similarly about interviews?
Sure. I think Catherine put it brilliantly. For me, as she said, showing compassion and just listening. If you listen to other people, they're more willing to talk. And really listen. Don't listen with the next question in mind. Listen with what they're saying and maybe play off that question, which is what you've been doing here, Lily, today. So we all have a list of questions, but if you really listen, it can take you into very interesting directions.
Speaking of listening, I actually did want to circle back to something you said earlier about the idea of reinventing after, specifically in your book, during an injury with baseball, and how people, because we've talking about all these great concepts of listening more and opening up and trying to gain perspective, but if you're already kind of stuck in a rabbit hole or in a silo, as you said, how can you choose to take that injury to the self and kind of reinvent and get into these tactics rather than just go with the anchor effect of the first thing you heard is all that matters?
With my case in baseball, I had no other choice. The Dodgers released me because of my injury, so I had to find another direction. Right. I think what you need is a resiliency to get past that this isn't the end of everything. This didn't work out. And you try many different things. I did. I tried many different things until I settled on international relations and went on to get the degrees in Middle East history. And you have to have that openness and courage and bravery to really put yourself out there. I've always said that most successful people, in fact, probably all successful people, especially those that have built themselves up from the beginning, have failed much more than they succeeded. So if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to fail, if you're willing to put yourself out there, you're more likely to succeed at something and hopefully find something that you're passionate about.
Certainly. I kind of, now that we've circled back slightly, I was just going to kind of branch out to the second part of Tripod, which is place. And there are so many places explored in this book, not only across time chronologically, but also in the book, you're traveling everywhere. I'm curious what role environment plays in the book. I'm a big believer in travel, as is Catherine. She's in the Explorers Club, for goodness sake. Yes. So she knows it very well and has traveled all over the place. And in fact, at Trinity University, I'm very much supportive of the travel abroad program because then you gain perspective. You gain perspective on where you come from, your environment by putting yourself in other environments. You learn a couple of things. One, that people in many ways are very much alike, much more alike than they are different, but there are these wonderful new discoveries you can make when traveling and new perspectives of looking at things. You can find positive things and positive experiences. So when I got to San Antonio, and again, as I said, I've been here 33 years now, I didn't know much about it, but learned very quickly. And one of the things I love about it is, it's a big city, but with a small town atmosphere. Yes.
and you're like one or two people removed from everything that happens in the town. So, which is both a good and a bad thing.
Yes. There's a great quote by Alan Alda that he actually gave when his daughter was graduating from Princeton. And it said something like, I'm paraphrasing, but be brave enough to go where no one else has ever gone. In order to live the creative life, you must leave behind your city of comfort and venture into the wilderness of your intuition and curiosity, something like that.
Yeah, great quote.
And it's beautiful. And it was to these young graduates. And I feel that way about place, that how we don't want to live that narrow life of feeling that we're in just one place. And the more places we visit, talk about, read about, understand, the bigger our worldview will be.
There are so many difficulties to traveling right now. As you said, like not only the accessibility, but also just inherently, I think people are believing more that places they once wanted to visit are maybe more dangerous than they once were. So there's all those feelings coming up. How do you think people can engage with this book, as you were talking about kind of inspiring and traveling to places in a different way? How does that maybe help with the current situation?
Well, I think curious, adventuresome people will travel no matter what they hear, and that we've got that. But I'm going back to what you said about books and the capability they have of taking you on a great adventure. I mean, I'll never forget Alice in Wonderland. Didn't we all go there down that rabbit hole? And those sort of things expand your mind and make you want to know more. So for those who can't buy a plane ticket and go to the Middle East right now or the Himalayas, I do think reading, especially if that story is laced with the voices of people from those places, so they're hearing the real voices and not just someone describing it from afar, that really can bring a place to life, even if you aren't able to travel there.
And I would say, I've encouraged people to do the research, because some places have bad reputations that are not deserved. Or, just parts of the country, just as in parts of San Antonio, are more dangerous than other parts, or parts of other cities, or parts of particular countries. So if you do your research and find out about these things, it should be just fine. So I would encourage people to look past the headlines and really do their research on a country or place where they want to go. And they may find it very enlightening and illuminating. That, oh wow, this is okay. I can go there.
I certainly felt that way towards even early on in the book when you're discussing being in Syria, and how every time you traveled there, the people are incredibly welcoming and kind. Didn't find it necessarily surprising, just because I've gotten to talk to Carol Fulbray and David Lesch, all these great authors who have done that travel, and just with those curious creative minds have gotten to go and just be in those places and see them as they are. So what would you want them to learn from this book?
I think most people have, if any view of the Middle East, a telescopic view. The 60,000 foot, which falls prey to generalizations and prejudices and assumptions. What this book does is it gives you more of a microscopic view of the Middle East, and a view from someone, from a particular individual, me in this case. And so you really get to see from the inside out and learn that microscopic view, much more nuanced, much more detailed and complex, and much more illuminating in the end. And so I think, and Catherine just does a fantastic job marrying the personal with the professional and the experiences in both sides of my life into this, what I think is such a well-written narrative.
I think even from the hook, which by going with the poisoning as an incident, I mean, that's something that maybe going into this knowing it's about the Middle East, you're like, oh, of course he was poisoned. But then you allow through that kind of metaphor to kind of float back through his history and being a Dodger and all these things that kind of then builds up from the foundation of those personal connections. I thought that was a really masterful way to tell the story, and just a testament to how diverse your story is. Touching on that, of the power of what books can teach you in that sense, there is a mention, it's a quote, I want to say it's from the mother of the journalist, but you mentioned the power of supreme empathy and love.
It was my mom, yeah.
I was going to say, I wasn't sure if it was your mother or if it was somebody else, but I thought that was beautiful because I love books, I love reading, I love writing. And from either of you, considering it's a quote from your mother, but how do you think books do teach us this?
Yeah, I think for those listening, And Catherine handles that moment beautifully and emotionally in the book, as it was a very emotional moment for me. And what we're referring to is when my childhood home burnt down from a gas leak and my parents were critically burned. My mom, 75% of her body, my dad, 65%. And my brother and I happened to be in the area, and we were brought to the hospital, and my brother and I, we were brought in to see my mom because they thought she was going to die. And we were just, we were getting nauseous because it just disfigured and the tremendous, unbelievable pain. And yet her first thought was of us and how we are doing. And I'm getting, emotional just thinking about it. But and so that is the supreme empathy I think you're talking about. And if someone can do that at that moment, in that sort of situation, with that much pain, we can all do it.
My intention of bringing up that quote was not to dive into that really emotional moment of the book, but just on a personal aside, my grandmother recently passed away, and I felt very touched by that sentiment of your own mother, just because I recently had to write her prayer, like a prayer card for my grandmother, and putting that language together with my older brother. And all we kept talking about was like her seeing the world through rose-colored glasses and just being like an empathetic, kind person. And I really felt a kinship to your mother's story within that. So that's, again, a great testament to the writing.
Again, throughout the book, many of these experiences such as that, look what just happened to you.
Yeah, exactly.
My experience, as conveyed so beautifully by Catherine, brought something back to life for you.
I was going to ask for, the importance of reading this or the importance of the story, but I think from what we just, talked about, that absolutely answers that.
A great interview.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Lois.
Thank you for joining Catherine, David, and I for another episode of exploring people, places, and our planet with Tripod. Come back soon.